Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Episode 37, Practicing Strategies and Interpretation. All right, so this week, Audiation in the Wild, let's talk about practice strategies. How do you get better quickly and doing less? What's setting this up is, in a couple days I've got to play 25 and 6/4 and a whole bunch of other Chicago tunes and some blues and some stuff. And this band's pretty damn good. And I haven't been playing my trumpet at all this summer, save for a couple other gigs where I sat in. Mm-hmm. And boy, I only had like 2 weeks to get in shape and get my fingers going and all that. And I got in shape so much quicker than I ever have. And there's some strategies that I know you use, Bo, now. And these are new to me. But what are the kinds of things we can pass on to our students, or what can we use for ourselves to exercise our fingers, get our technique down, get our musicianship down, get whatever you're struggling with in terms of getting ready for a performance or helping your kids get ready for a performance? Mm-hmm. What are those things that are really effective, really efficient, and why is it that we need breaks? Because this is one of the things that happened to me. I took a break after one of my days, mm-hmm. and I was so much better the next day. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so there really are a lot of techniques that you can use. I imagine this works for singers, but I'm thinking predominantly instrumentally for my own personal use of a lot of this stuff. So I think, if we just acknowledge all of Gordon's insights are at play here. So teaching students about the value of audiation, and specifically when I'm practicing, because of audiation issues, I'm almost exclusively working at the phrase level. If there's truly a tonal pattern or rhythm pattern I don't understand in a piece, I will workshop that specific tonal or rhythm pattern just to make sure I'm kind of up to snuff. But often when I'm learning new content in terms of repertoire, I learn it in whatever makes most sense at a phrase level: 4 bars, 8 bars, 16 bars. With Bach, it might be smaller phrases. It might be 2 bars, a little pattern like that. But there are certain patterns and techniques you can use to schedule the repetitions that you do, because a really interesting way to look at this whole issue of practice, let's say we have a bunch of different groups of people who are all learning the same repertoire and they're all the same aptitude level. They're clones of you, essentially. If we let them all do a certain amount of repetitions or a certain amount of practice attempts, how do you properly sequence your attempts? Should you do 100 trials in day 1 of the week, or should you split those trials across 5 days? And then if that's 20 trials a day for 5 days, should those all be at the same 20 at a time, or should they be further split up into I do a few minutes of scales and then a few minutes of this song, and then how do we sequence our practice session? And is there anything in the psychology of learning that tips us off to methods of sequencing our practice that would give us the benefit that Eric set us up with, better results with less effort? And definitely that is. And I've experimented a lot with that as I've been getting a classical guitar degree. And I mean, honestly, it's hard to find a better Bible than just theory of instruction. There's a lot of wide-ranging psychology research you can use for inspiration. Don't practice more than 4 hours a day because you're going to burn out. And naps generally help a lot because they help you synthesize things as if you were getting a proper sleep. Maybe not to the same degree, but naps definitely do help. But maybe why don't we start there with rest, the way people conceptualize rest? Because I think a lot of hardworking musicians think of time spent practicing in terms of hours typically, but rest is really important. And when you take that rest, is it actually useful to practice 3 hours in a row ever? Unless you're just having a great time? Probably not. I just can't see a good defense of that. Why not practice for an hour or 90 minutes and then go walk the dog for an hour and then come back and, give your brain some time to digest? How do you think about rest with practicing, Eric?
Oh, you definitely need rest. One of my biggest hurdles as a trumpet player is just developing stamina.
Mm-hmm.
So the first day, I just buzzed my mouthpiece, and that's all I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to stretch my range up and down, and I started in the middle, and I just wanted a good sound on my mouthpiece. And every once in a while, I'd pick it up and just blow again, and and then I'd go cook dinner, and then while I'm cooking dinner, I'd blow on it again, and just extend my range a little higher, a little lower. But I might have played 15 minutes, 20 minutes that day. I just played until my chops felt like they were getting tired.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as that happened, I stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And I rested so I get the blood back in. So there's that kind of rest, like just developing that. And then there's, after a few days of just doing basic things, long tones and slurs. I don't know how many people are our listening audience that are brass people. Just basic, just reestablishing air and how to change the air without using any fingers. And then the fingers was the thing this is where it really showed up. Like my fingers were awful. I couldn't believe it took me as long as it did for me to get my fingers up in past. But this time I just hammered like the weirdest fingers. You can't see me, but I'm doing
Index and ring.
I'm doing 1 3, yeah. Index and ring. 1 3
playing
middle.
D
1
on the
3
trumpet.
like yeah, D F sharp on the trumpet, if you know what that is. It's 1 3 and middle. There's 3 valves. So I got the middle one and then the outside 2. The middle one, outside 2. And I just slam those 2 back and forth. And I'd pick other fingers and I just slam them really slowly and slam them hard.
There's only so many combinations that 3 fingers can go into.
Well, and there's some, but here's the thing. I've been slamming the hard ones, and then when I went back to integrate the easy ones, I couldn't go from an easy one to a hard one.
Yeah, that's a different. I mean, I would think of that. It's a different motor pattern that has to be learned.
Yeah, it like all the easy ones, I couldn't put them. They didn't fit in with the harder ones.
Yeah.
So what I did is I started just doing the most difficult ones. Put an easy one, another difficult one, an easy one, a difficult one, an easy one, right? And usually it'd be the same difficult one, the same easy one. But I was just slamming my fingers down, one little pattern at a time, finger pattern. It was just for my muscles of my fingers, because of how sloppy, especially my ring finger, had become with, it's basically just atrophy.
We were talking off air about
summer.
this, but that technical, that very motor pattern, like not based off of audiation necessarily. Like we're talking about just the dexterity control. It's interesting with different instruments because I play piano and guitar, and I grew up playing brass instruments and stuff too. But I found that the classical guitar pieces over like any of the other stuff I've learned, like saxophone or classical piano pieces, they're more fragile to be forgotten. Like, because of the dexterity issues, they start dissolving on you if you don't maintain your repertoire. It's absurd. Like it just starts bye-bye.
So I would do that perfectly, never make a mistake. And if I did, I would do it like 10 times more, which would take another 20 seconds.
Sure.
Because they don't take very long to do. It just takes 20 seconds. I'm holding my... and eventually I would just do every half a second, da da dee da dee, whatever. And after maybe 10 minutes of that, I was done. So I did my mouthpiece, I was doing the left hand slurs, I was just doing my fingers. I came back to like the 4th or 5th day. I couldn't believe how effortless some of it was. And then I started actually practicing, scales. Finger scales or chromatic scales or chord, just the normal kind of stuff I used to do, just to kind of connect back to the, the level that I thought I could get back to from previous playing days when I was really playing a lot, a lot being, I had 4 or 5 gigs a month or something like that.
Yep.
Or in graduate school or undergraduate school, I was playing, practically every day. But I took a day off. And then the next day, it seemed like miraculously my range was there. my fingers were starting to really feel a lot better. And then I started practicing the music.
Yeah.
And when I practiced the music, I'd practice it just with the mouthpiece. Like, how much can my ear... And like, how bad I was on my mouthpiece was exactly how bad it is when I put it on the horn. Because the horn kind of hones it, you know, but it's not exact if your air isn't exact. So the air, you got to hear it through your horn, or through your mouthpiece before you put it in the horn. And that just honed the intonation so much better.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like a rehearsal came up, right? And I like 3.5 hours, and I was shot like within an hour.
Sure.
But in that last couple hours, I had to keep playing. I just kept concentrating on the pressure that I wasn't providing that I needed for breathing, and then took a day off, and all of a sudden I've got stamina.
Yeah.
And then we had another 3.5 hour practice last night, and I'm ready to play again today.
Oh yeah.
And then
Yeah,
tomorrow
your body
I'm
will
going to take
adapt
off,
to it.
and the gig is on Sunday. So
Yeah.
I'm like, in a matter of like a week and a half or 2 weeks, I'm up to playing some Chicago tunes, which, if you don't know, this is the best horn lines in the universe for
Yeah.
the 80s, 90s.
That's really cool.
And so I'm ready for this gig,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much. I got a couple lines that I'm working on still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
But
really
the
cool.
band is good, and I need to be up to snuff a little bit.
I grew up playing tuba in concert band. It usually took a week to get like full breath support back after not playing tuba over the summer for a couple months, just because that instrument is not technically challenging in terms of finger dexterity, but it's all the skills all in the lungs and how you shape the note. And man, if your lungs weren't like accustomed to playing tuba for 70 minutes every
Yeah.
day,
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's quite a project.
Yes, so it may not be, everybody's need to know how to develop stamina on a brass instrument, but what was key for me was not making mistakes. Or if I did, I would just work on that and not play through everything to give me the buzz of like, oh, I can play this song. I didn't practice any of the stuff that I knew that I could audiate perfectly, and the fingers were easy. I didn't play any of that. Like a feel good, part of my lesson is like, okay, I need to feel good about this. It's like, no, I got to work on, it's like doing the running through the tires instead of playing the football game.
Sure.
Football game's
Sure,
way more
sure.
fun than running through the tires, but you got to run through the tires, and you got to do it in such a way that you're not falling down.
So
Just run
that's actually
through the
something I wanted to
tires.
get into, because let's say you have a performance to give and you have a lot of repertoire to learn. Like, it could be a lot. Like I just did a classical guitar exam that was like 6 pieces, and they're decent length, all of them. And then there's scales and everything you have to learn. But the question is, if you have a performance coming up in a month or two, or in your case a week, how do you sequence your learning if you have the time? And like, one thing I really am not a fan of anymore is like, and I don't think works well, other than for just beginners, because beginners get newbie gains, kind of just any time spent on their instrument tends to make them better. But if you're actually structuring a practice session, like, don't play pieces over and over again. It's such a giant waste of time.
Oh, no.
Because if you think about this, the program that I had took about 40 minutes to get through. If practice is just me playing that over and over again, how many times can I play that in a day? Like, not that many. Like, that's the wrong way to look at it, just from a purely time perspective.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things involved here that I'm thinking of, and one is you've got a goal, number one. So my gig is Sunday, 1:00, boom, right? And like having that goal 2 weeks ago, it's like, this is so if you got a rehearsal coming up, or if you got, it's like a deadline for you to have your part down before you go into the group, or you've got a performance. You've got a recital to put on. So you've got a deadline. So that's one thing. So
That definitely
it's not
helps
like,
the
oh, I
motivation.
can do it next week. So that's the motivating
Sure.
factor. And the other thing is that it's really fucking fun music to play. Oh my God. For a horn player to play Chicago, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's good.
and the harmonies are far out. So I'm doubly down on this, right? You know, and I've got
Sure.
a trombone and a saxophone player on the other side of me. That's always fun, you know, with a rock band. So that's one thing. Now, there's another piece of this is that when you're getting ready to perform an entire piece at once, you do want to understand and know the form. So if I've listened to the music forever,
Sure.
so I didn't have any problem with any of that. But if it's new to you and you haven't played and felt the form, you haven't listened to, like, that's great. You know, put the CD in your car and listen to the pieces so you have a sense of the overarching, you know,
Completely agree.
like what Jim Jordan said about moving the rhythm forward, moving time forward, moving the harmonic progressions. You keep things moving through time. That you have a sense of that, so you can build the larger form, and you know, and then inside that, what you were talking about is work on these phrases.
So what?
Right, and then within the phrases, the tonal patterns or the rhythm patterns, and within that, just slamming my fingers back and forth
Exactly.
on the weird stuff that my fingers didn't want to do, and just by making no mistake with my fingers
Yep.
and developing speed, all of a sudden I had no problem going up the
Sure.
tempo.
I think what you
Yeah.
just said there is really important. I want to touch on something because what you're describing is it's kind of a spectrum of magnification for chunks of a piece. Because we're talking about chunking essentially, because practice has to be done in small sections. Tonal patterns are often like, you know, a very short macro beat or a couple macro beats, like depending on how you look at the tonal pattern. But rhythm patterns and, you know, all that kind of stuff, they're very micro. And then you have the phrase level. And before I was saying I focus on the phrase level, I focus on it just as a place to start, because if the piece has anything that's super hard to audiate, it'll be recognizable when I listen to individual phrases, whether I'm recording or play them on my own. If at that point I don't understand the tonal pattern or rhythm, I drop a level below. But then what I'm traditionally trying to do is, once I have a bunch of phrases, I play them in different orders, and then I play them in the correct order. And that actually can be mostly practiced mentally, because once you can play each individual phrase, it's not really a big order to audiate them in order and out of order. And you can do that while you're standing in line at the grocery store. And I find like that's a really good use, because that's a purely psychic issue that does not need an instrument in your hand to solve, assuming you can play everything. And what I started finding with Engelman's advice of how to track things in terms of when you're designing a curriculum, I can actually just write a list of pieces, sight read them all once, get a gauge for how difficult they are for me, highlight some bars, and then make it like a calculated estimate. Like, this will literally take me like 13 days to learn with buffer. Like, I know it to that level. Like, if I wanted it at a quality that I want.
Yeah.
Because you just know how long it takes you to learn 4 bars.
That's something I didn't add to my regimen was writing and structuring everything out. But writing things down makes it more real than if you just have it in your head.
Totally.
I guess I didn't do that. Now it's getting scary because I really got a lot under, you know. But let me tell you where this how it started. You know, he texts me, he says, "You want to play?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I want to play Chicago."
Sure.
So what's the first thing he does? Here's a list of the tunes. And some of them you might know from 3 years ago when we were getting ready to do his 65th birthday party, right? And then COVID hit. So that's the last time we were together.
Wow.
Until this week. So he sent me, the list of the tunes, and I'm looking them up, whatever. But then he made a CD of the versions that we're playing. So there's different versions of everything. So anyway, so I just had the CD in the car. It's like, and I already know half of them. But man, is that just so helpful just to like listen to the tunes we're going to play? It's like, yeah, I love this tune.
That's what I do before I select repertoire that I'm going to give my like 2 months of my life over to. I listen to a ton of repertoire that are possible choices, and then I whittle them down. But
to me, that's not even practicing. That's just having a good time on the way to work.
Yeah, I mean, I do it while I walk the dog and go to the gym. I'm like listening. I'm like basically, having competitions between pieces. Which one should I learn? It's cool.
Yeah, I often hear that like people get the pianists when they reference Fur Elise, they just like roll their eyes. It's like, oh my God, not this tune again. But I don't know if you're tired of it. Why? you know,
This happens with guitar
or
players too. Like there's certain classical guitar compositions like Lienda, it's just this piece that everyone wants to learn, that everyone's interested in, and it's still fun to play. Like I still have fun playing it. It's not that I don't.
it's like, what are we not doing that it turns out not fun?
I feel like a lot of the I wanna talk about interpretation just for 1 second because I'm reading this book about what the habits of genius. I think that's what the book is called, and it was making the claim that composers can be geniuses because there's some kind of artistic creativity in producing musical output, but a performer like Glenn Gould or Yo-Yo Ma, if they're performing box music, that can't have a quality of genius to it because there's not the same kind of creativity. And I just profoundly disagreed because the way he phrases this argument, it's like, are we gonna literally think that Lady Gaga is a genius but Glenn Gould's not? Like, is that even make any sense?
Wait, so say that again. I want to hear what you said at the beginning.
Okay, so this book, The Habits of Genius, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because it talks about musical interpretation as being a defensible art form in and of itself. So in the book, The Habits of Genius, he gives this example of geniuses are people that create artistic output or some kind of output. So in a musical sense, a genius is a composer by definition, not a performer, not an interpreter. And I don't agree with this because that
Oh no.
that makes it so like any pop musician or just any like 3-year-old that says they're a songwriter is more creative than the best musical interpreters and performers. But it's a mixing of domains because interpretation
Yeah.
and performance is a separate domain that can have genius inside it. And
Yeah.
that's the reason I brought this up is because if you're bored of a piece, I'm not saying play Leanda and Fur Elise only and nothing else. I'm saying if you're bored of them, maybe you actually need to search out a new interpretive style because that can breathe
Yeah.
like a really cool life into the piece again.
Yeah. So here's where I come from with that. It's like when I play Twinkle Twinkle, like the right way or the wrong way or stuff for my kids, I'm not just playing it. I'm modeling being a musician in front of them. I'm not just playing
I
the
know
right notes
exactly
and the
what
right
you're talking
rhythms.
about.
I'm actually playing something that sounds, you know, that has some movement, some flow, some weight to it. And I can't say that every time, that I'm putting my heart and soul into it,
Sure.
but I'm thinking musically.
You know what I do? I just make it cool. Like if I'm playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star for like a young kid that I'm playing, I play it the right way, like in major with one hand, and then I add some kind of crazy accompaniment that I'm improvising onto it, and they find it
Yeah,
interesting, and so do I. And they're kind of like, "Whoa,
yeah, yeah.
like what
So
was
there's
that?"
ways to the novelty of it, but when I'm just
Yeah.
trying to play it straight, it's still being musical. That's the thing, and it's like it doesn't get it's boring. Well, I'm thinking like
So if we can link this conversation back to the overarching conversation, the reason I start with the phrase is because I want to be thinking about interpretation early on. I'm not trying to find the definitive interpretation I'm going to carry to every performance, like while I'm learning the first 4 bars, but I'm exploring different types of playing it. And that's actually where a lot of my attention goes. It is technical in the sense like my instrument is technical, but the brunt of my mind power is being sent into the interpretive process. Because if it's not, all the motor learning is not going to be filed away to help interpretive issues. The motor learning is going
it's
to
a
be
good.
like
It
disconnected.
sounds like it's a yeah. That taking the phrase is a good middle ground to start because you've got the context, you've got the style, you've got the other things, and you can drill down. Before I even drilled down, I just needed to remember I've got 3 fingers that need to work.
Oh yeah, sure.
I need my top, like that. But
I have some warm up
musically,
pieces that I do that with, like really
yeah,
simple classical pieces that have like some odd fingerings or odd movements that you wouldn't normally see, and they warm the hands up in a nice way, and you can get the
yeah,
blood flowing like that. Very nice.
yeah. So if you're talking to your students about preparing to play, instead of working on your own development, your own musical or technical development, how do you help them get the same idea of that when you practice, you really shouldn't be just, focusing on where you make mistakes, or on the other hand, exactly focus on exactly why you're making those mistakes.
Oh, definitely.
Ideational or technical. How do you assign the work, or how do you assign the process for them to learn to teach themselves when they're practicing?
So okay, so that's an insane point. So what I think there are two ways to do this. One, you do it by association, by induction. You practice with them, and you don't explicitly tell them what you're doing at all. You don't say we have to do this many repetitions and you're trying to get this much right. You just guide them in correct practice. Once they seem, I don't know if there's an age, or it's like some kind of combination between age and psychic maturity, where you can explicitly teach them
psychic maturity.
You can psychological maturity. You can explicitly teach them, this is how you practice. In general, you can go off-roading a bit and improvise or screw around, but like if you actually want to learn something, this is what you do. And I've done this with students. All my high school students have this stuff written down. Some of my younger students, but one of the most simple, there's two simple things you can do. 70% success on first trial plus 100% by the end of a session. That's one thing. So when you're first exposed to something, you should be able to do it 70% of the time. If you keep failing at it, add in filler activities or make the activity easier so you can get your percentage up. And then by the time you're done the practice session, it could be a 5-minute session, an hour session. Doesn't matter how long the practice session is in general, but you have to have that mastered. So you shouldn't be leaving the scene with things that are like half baked necessarily. We'll come back. There's some exceptions to this, but like let's pause there for a sec. And we've talked about this on the podcast a lot recently, but it's such an important rule of thumb to have. Like, Eric, can you say like how different this is than not having this kind of in your mind while you're practicing?
Oh my God, I can't. It's unbelievable.
In terms of bang for your buck, like how many words can change your musical life that efficiently? I mean, this is one of the 70%, success on first exposure. Like, holy smokes.
Yeah. So it reminds me of this one time, and I had these 4 and 5-year-olds that we were playing with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra.
Okay.
And the older kids were playing their instruments, and I said, we're going to have a xylophone part. We're going to get out the Orff instruments. And the rhythms on this stuff were nuts. Mm-hmm. And the kids could say them, but their coordination was wonky, of course. So I knew they could audiate them. And so what I did is just slow it down and took the eighth notes away and just had them play the quarter notes, because every eighth note was a double. So it's like stuff like... some lines like that.
Yeah, Twinkle's like that.
Yeah. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And this guy he wrote this piece, and he didn't really have a clue what kids in kindergarten should be able to do technically. So we just took that and went da 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 da, right? Whatever, there was a pickup, we put that in.
Okay.
So da 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 da, right? So it became da 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 da. And I said, every time we make a mistake, we have to do it 7 times right. Again, we have to do extra. And this is a long time ago, where I was really under the gun to get this thing. We didn't get the music for like...
That's interesting, because that rule of thumb is often recommended by a lot of music teachers, piano teachers, all these kind of teachers. But the only reason I don't like you have to do it 10 times in a row is that it kind of doesn't tell you the actual problem. Like, the problem is that when you start getting below 70 to 80% correct, it makes problems. But like with this 10 times in a row thing, someone could play something wrong like a ton of times and still like not be, even if they're playing it 10 times in a row later, it's still not a good piece of content for them.
So here's where I think it worked. It made the children need to want to get it right
sure.
sooner. I think that's where it worked. Not that there are times where if you've got something in your brain or your fingers just wrong and you just got it that way and you can't understand the musical part, right? Like like doing it the right way. It takes so much longer to unlearn something than it is to learn it right the first time.
There's an interesting segue that I want to come back to with that. Well, I mean, there's a really interesting thing that happens where, like, if you're playing a long piece, there's like an A section in the beginning that has something that's similar to like something that's in the end of the piece. I think a lot of people will think, oh, they're similar, so I'll learn both in the same practice session. It's not a good idea. The reason is you get this interference effect between the two. So like every time you think like, well, in the fourth bar of this phrase, it goes this way. But then when you start doing that in the end, you have this like competing signal. So what you do is and this is what can happen if you teach, I don't know, if you try to teach someone how to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in major and minor on the same day, you get this interference effect. They confuse the two. So you teach one thing, or you learn, the first section of the song. Do sections of the song next that are really different, that are like not totally similar, because they're not going to interfere. Once the first one has been in your mind for a few days or a week, then you can add another. Engelman calls it adding a member to a set, but you add the next member, so which would be the part at the end of the song, that's a little bit different. It just gives some cognitive space between learning the two that makes them stand out more.
Yeah.
And I think we have to do this when we learn harmony, right? I mean, that's what you found is like, you need 1 and 5 to compare each other, but if the 4 is taught too soon before they have 1 and 5, it's like too many discriminations to make.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's some kids that insist that 4 is tonic more often than they insist that 4 is dominant if they haven't distinguished it yet, if they're not ready. So if I inappropriately teach it too quickly, it's funny to see how many people consider that it's more tonic than it is dominant.
So this is related to the conversation. How do you know if you're teaching it too quickly? And another good rule to have on top of the 70% and all that yada yada is that you should learn something as if it was brand new 2 to 3 times on completely different days. So if you learned phrase 1 of your piece, 4 bars, take yourself through it slowly, 70% exposure on first attempt, 100% after the practice session. Do that 2 or 3 times and treat it as if it's new material, and it'll really stick with you, doing things in small pieces like that. The piece of information I was alluding to before that I had my students write down was this thing: do something 3 times in a row, then, so 3 A's. So I play the phrase 3 times in a row and it's fine. Then I play A, so I do it again, and then I play B, and B is something short. It's a scale, it's a tonal pattern, it's a rhythm pattern, it's improv. It's like under 10 seconds. Then I go back to A. So now I'm mixing the two back and forth, because it's much easier to do something 3 times in a row than constantly like adding a distractor task in between. And then eventually, once you can do that, the distractor task a few times in a row, then you do A, B, C, D, E. And now what are C, D, and E? C, D, and E are old songs that you're trying to not forget. Little pieces of old things. So what you're doing is you're constantly mixing these new phrases in with old phrases. And a really cool thing that happens here is like when you play an old phrase that you know really, really well, you will play it with this authority and like audiation power that starts to seep into the new phrase. Because when you play an old phrase and just lay it down, then you play something new you're playing, you kind of can tell like, whoa, like I'm not playing that very smooth. Like I'm playing the right notes, but it's not singing yet. It's not leaping off the page. But that's kind of how I'll get students to practice. And I've noticed the students that practice like that on their own, where it's like 3 in a row, and then the next level do it, and then distract, and then the next level is like a lot of distractors. That takes 5 to 10 minutes depending on how long the phrase is, and it's like cemented into the mind after that. It's like
yeah, it's like less practice equals more. It just
well, I have
it's
some
amazing that your brain needs the distraction so that you go back, you're making the wiring stronger on the thing you're learning. That's all.
For sure.
And you can't make it strong by keep hammering that, because that wiring isn't going to be stable if you don't unwire it for a little bit and then go back.
And what we're really talking about here, like you said before, is the performance. And what are you going to have to do at the performance? You don't get to play a lick 15 times in a row. You have to play it right the first time. And this trains you to do that. That's really all it's doing. Is because if you can play something boom first time after having done 4 other like little riffs before it, you'll be fine at the performance. But if you need to play it over and over, like it's gonna be
And you start that at the phrase level when you're practicing distractor, phrase, distract, right? Or tonal pattern, distractor, tonal pattern, something different. And then you can do that.
It's a fun way to practice, though, because once you realize how effective it is, you don't have to be super calculated with it. Like, I'm not writing lists of, like, first I do this, then I do this. Then I just look at the page, like, oh, there's a phrase here. I learn it. Then I'm off improvising other little ideas that have been in my head. And I actually find by the time I have a program memorized and ready to perform, I'm actually mostly playing other stuff when I'm practicing. I'll be playing other tunes, and then I quickly play the tune once. And then I'll do other tunes. And so it mimics more what a performance will be like later, where it's just play it now, go. But this all comes together with, selecting the appropriate difficulty level. Make sure you're biting off small chunks. If something's really hard, just bite off the smallest chunk.
Yeah. So I'm really taking today off to let my chops recover, but
chop rest.
I'm not taking it off. I'm playing some just to make sure I've got things. I just want to remind myself what it's going to feel like. How it felt when I first started yesterday. I want that same feeling, so I'm going to gather that feeling. But because I'm not going to practice making sound, I can sing and move my fingers and do that, even though I need to let my chops rest. So there's ways to get around, like a day off. If you don't have, right? I only have 2 more days, so I can keep working my fingers without suffering.
Oh yeah.
But we'll see how I feel, tomorrow. But usually that day off before the performance is going to be awesome for me.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm teaching all day and going to a baseball game at night, so there's my distractor items.
Yeah, the rest is really powerful.
Yeah. And the gig is in the middle of the day. It's 1 o'clock, so it's like I can let it loose.
I find napping before performing, I generally play better. So I'll practice in the morning and play the pieces a couple times if I have time, and then I'll take a nap. But the performance always goes better after a nap. It's like I got 1 extra encoding session in there.
At one point, I did put a math textbook under my pillow.
Okay.
I slept on it before an exam. This is my undergraduate, and I did surprisingly well.
Very nice.
It was something I just I don't know if that, I don't know. I think there's some woo-woo out there too that we don't understand. But that's
so.
All right.
I wanted to.
So where's that?
I wanted to close this off. So we have these techniques for organizing your practice. These phrases, these small chunks. What do you do actually if you have an audiation problem? So if you're playing a piece and there's some chord or something that just musically doesn't sound right to you. I mean, how do you start approaching this when it's in your own repertoire?
I'll play it on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And then I'll sing it. And then I'll play it on the keyboard. And then I'll sing it. And then I'll buzz my mouthpiece to it. And if that doesn't fix it, then I stop.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll do it again later. After another distractor item. But usually after I sing it a couple times, I'm good.
Yeah.
Then I can buzz it on my mouthpiece, and that's even better.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like a rhythm, I'd almost never have rhythm problems except when other people are playing the rhythm with me and they're not playing it the same.
Sure.
And it could be a style thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I had an accent, the hat accent, with a legato line under it. It's like, how are you playing that? It's like, just listen to the recording, man. Do you like it the way it is on the recording? That's the next thing. It's like,
Sure.
So the saxophone players would bop, bop, and I was going bop, bop, and it's just different.
Yeah.
He was playing more with the hat, and I was playing, separated but longer. But yeah, you've got to. I was just following the way that the band or Chicago had played these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think having the oral model, whether or not you're going to use it, is still very valuable, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, and it is an issue in music education. Listening to repertoire before you learn it, I think, is obviously a great idea. Some people think you're going to be too heavily influenced by the person you listen to, but I just figure, wouldn't the more exposures to different ways of playing a piece be even better for you? Because say you like the way someone plays the first half of the piece but not the second half, I mean, you can very easily imitate the things you like and toss the things you don't like right in the garbage.
Yeah, and when you get your kids to that level where they're playing it different ways, that's one of the things I think is really valuable. Play it this way, now play it this way, and just make it awful or make it different.
I started noticing that with
have
students.
Your kids be able to do the express it the wrong way, and they might get a kick out of it, or they might not care for it musically. But then they've got the contrast to hold it, especially if they're young, under 7 or 8 years old. Give them opportunities to play things with the wrong expression, and then go back to something that's, and this is subjective, right, wrong expression. But
sure.
But the guy might be listening to a lot of heavy metal, and he likes Twinkle Twinkle that way. So go ahead.
Oh yeah.
But then also have the expressive context be also,
I think that's a great point.
18th century.
Because we talk about changing the meter and changing the tonality and changing the harmony, but changing the way you phrase something can be really useful. Like I find with piano students, I teach them what a staccato is through just improv with them. And then later, once I hear them actually selectively phrasing stuff, they'll put little staccatos in phrases that I noticed a couple weeks ago they didn't. Then I just tell them, like, that's a staccato. But they can already do it, like, long before I'm pointing it out and labeling. Sure. But it's really cool to see. I taught this one kid who's in high school now. I taught him how to do some trills on the piano, and I started noticing, like, he's a great improviser too, but he puts trills in really interesting spots that I wouldn't have considered putting them. But when I play it, I'm like, wow, like that's auditionally, like, grammatically correct to have the trill there. Like, it makes sense, and I like it. But it was so cool. The first times I started seeing those interpretive voices start to come out of people. Like, it's not just like this kid's playing a tonal pattern or rhythm pattern while he's improvising that I didn't teach him. He's actually phrasing in a way that I didn't explicitly teach him, and that's
Well, you're given a bowl of goodies, and you can pick out a Mars bar, you can pick out an Almond Joy, you can pick out a Snickers, whatever. And if the kids have those choices in their bowl to pick and choose from, if they've got enough experience with those different, articulations or phrasings or whatever, what you're giving them is more freedom to own the piece rather than dictating what it is you're telling them to play.
That's why I think a lot of the fun of classical music comes in is knowing how much improv freedom you have for interpretation. You can't choose the literal harmony. I mean, sometimes you could, depending on the composer, you could take that license. But I mean, we know Chopin wasn't happy with people changing his composition, so to play it like he said, maybe sometimes. But it's very fun to know you can just phrase things differently. And there's an interesting article on, I think, Noah Kageyami's website, The Bulletproof Musician, about classical musicians who think what they're doing is actually more like improv than just playing something else. They perform better.
For sure. I was going to say that most of what we're talking about really, or to me, it sits in the world of, notation,
Mm-hmm.
audiation, especially. So if if I'm looking at the page, what's really there is almost nothing compared to what it is that you add to what's on the page. What did Gordon say? It's like 90%. It's not on the page.
Mm-hmm.
The exact articulations can't be notated. The exact loudness can't really.
People try.
All of that.
People
And
definitely
it's like,
try.
yeah, but people try to, yeah, and it just sounds, it sounds like when you play, through a software notation device.
My only problem with some of this is like sometimes I like looking at a clean score and just interpreting it like how I want to. Like some classical guitar scores, so much dynamics, so many phrasing markings. The fingering markings are almost completely not necessary, but over the top, and the page is just filled up with information. And sometimes it's just not that helpful for the end like performance result.
Yeah. It's like, why did Beethoven write all that language all over his scores?
Depending on the piece.
He was trying to add the audiation to the notes. The notes weren't enough for him,
Yeah.
wasn't he? And he didn't have a way to. You don't have a way to communicate that through the page, really, except by expressing it in language. But like you said,
But imagine this. Imagine you're like sitting at home with the Rite of Spring, like the little score. You can buy those little books, $10. You can read the Rite of Spring. I had that. But imagine you were also sitting with the score and Stravinsky was sitting right next to you. Like, I feel like you'd get a different idea of how the piece should be played because the guy would be like, a lot more descriptive. It'd be quite the experience. And I listened to Stravinsky's recording, I think, of the Rite of Spring after I really cemented a different conductor's version in my head, and Stravinsky sounded weird to me. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Because he was probably, closer to home.
Well, yeah.
You would imagine.
Yeah, you'd think so.
There was some tempos I didn't like that he chose for his own pieces.
He goes too fast. There's things where I think he wanted his orchestra to play too fast.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
and it became sloppy, and maybe that's the orchestra.
But see, the thing is, like, maybe he didn't care. Maybe he was just messing around. He was just like, yeah, this time's like this.
It's like Jimi Hendrix. This whole thing's an E, and the last chord is F. And it's like, why? The band last night, it's like playing a tune I don't play on, and it's like, let's just get rid of that. Like, we're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just too out, and people are going to say, what? And I think it was just, I think Jimmy was just saying "fuck you" at the end of the tune. Like when he was playing. Why not? Why wouldn't he?
Yeah.
That's totally him. He would totally do that. Just leave everybody with a flat two, and that's the end.
Sure.
The whole thing is.
No, what's funny is like the tone of his electric guitar is gonna like the tone of the guitar plus the flat two chord is intense, but like a lot of like jazz tunes end with like a beautiful flat two major seven off the flat two, and with a nice piano like up high, and it sounds really peaceful.
Yeah, well,
it's like really weird.
They're leaving you hanging.
They're leaving you hanging.
Peaceful. But it's a peaceful hang. It's like Butterfly Lovers, the traditional Chinese tune, ends on the dominant, and it just means that it goes on forever. It's not a.
So it's funny. When I grew up, I had friends that didn't like songs that ended on the dominant. They wanted the resting tone in some form, like tonic triad or the resting tone to end the song. But for me, when it ended on the dominant, I felt like it was unresolved, like a movie that was unresolved.
It was just well, some of the Baroque tunes, Scarlatti and Gabriele, a lot of those tunes will end on the dominant, and it just like in the context of the church, God's power goes forever, and so they never resolved it.
I kind of felt like that on albums with the fade out. How albums would like fade out a song. Some of my friends, it would drive them nuts. They'd be like, does the song just not end? And but I kind of liked it because it's like it's not a song that's supposed to just
for
end on that note.
for some tunes, it's wonderful, and I totally love fade outs for some tunes, but it's oftentimes it's a cop out. I just feel like it's a cop out because there's a recording blurb, and they just decided, let's fade it out before the blurb happens, or they're old recordings that they recovered and they didn't end right or whatever. What I really like is hearing the 4 versions that they took and they play the whole thing until they fall apart, and they say, okay, let's take. You hear the rehearsal, or you hear all the different versions of the solos that people take, and that to me is crazy. So you hear, they're four takes of the same tune, and they're working on, they're trying to get something straight. Maybe somebody.
It's fun to listen to different takes of a tune, like really fun.
It's really valuable.
It made me feel like Wes Montgomery was like a human being, because there was the one version of one of his solo songs had a solo. I was like, is this guy like from this planet? And then I listened to like takes 2 and 3, and I was like, okay, these are still really good, but I no longer think he's like mythical.
Yeah. There's this Tad Dameron CD that I picked up for like nothing, and they had all these takes, like 3 takes of the same tune. But what's funny is that there's 2 in a row, and then they play a couple other tunes, and they go back to that same tune again.
They know about this stuff.
I don't know. They just said, yeah, let's trash it for now. Let's not work on it. Let's just go on to the next tune. We're stuck.
One thing that's cool about taking breaks, whether it's like in the jam session or even like over weeks and months, is that it seems like when you learn something really efficiently and take a break and come back to it, the novelty is like extra heightened when you come back to it, but you also have learned it really well, because it's hard to balance the two, because I can learn something that's insanely hard for me. Like I could go play a Chopin nocturne, but it's going to take so long because I'm not a friggin' concert pianist that the novelty will drop as I'm trying to get through the piece, and I'll hate it. But people that are skilled enough, they can learn that piece fast, and the novelty's still insanely high for them, and they like playing it. Like the balance of learning and novelty, I think, is partially why the 70% on first exposure works, because everything has high novelty if you're just munching it like a little Pac-Man while you're learning. But if you have to deal with one thing that's really big and hard to do, you lose interest in it.
What's the percentage of first takes are always the best takes?
It's really high. I think
yeah.
A couple I was recording some like soul and like R&B things, and I was just sending them to Eric as like, they're done in kind of like Logic, like they're not perfect, but they're fun.
They're
and
awesome.
a lot of the stuff that's on there was first take. It just has this like freshness to it. It has this novelty to it that you kind of lose pretty quickly after that. This happened once. I was playing a gig with my aunt. First night in this little jazz club, I was feeling the room. Like my playing sounded like it was for the room. But the second night, my playing was good, but I didn't feel like as connected to the room. Like before, I felt like my guitar was like part of the hustle and bustle of the kitchen. Like it was weird.
So 20 years ago, or no, more than that, 25, I was playing 7 gigs a week, way back. And it was the same repertoire. We were all up in the Poconos in Northeast Pennsylvania, and we're just hopping around to different, clubs. And we had 2 on Saturday and off Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, right?
Wow.
And most of them were like just 2 hours, so it wasn't terrible. But there's times where the band was just on, and the room sucked.
Oh,
and
no.
There's times where we played just nasty. It was just like we hated each other, and we were really listening. And the band, and the room was like crazy. It almost never synced up. Like we were
That can happen with
great,
teachers and students. You feel like you gave a really good lesson, but the student wasn't really there. And then sometimes the opposite happens. You're just like hanging out, and they're like really into it.
I don't know what that is, but it's almost never synced up. Like Lady Gaga will play, and every night everybody loves everything she does.
Sure. But there's a survivor bias. Like, who's going to pay $200 to go see Lady Gaga? People that are super fucking pumped about Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
So she's just got She's got something going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I think
Well,
that's where the genius of, for me, pop music, in terms of, what makes pop music, it's not the tonal patterns in pop music. It's not the rhythm patterns. They're fine. They're just like every other genre. Good pop musicians, they're performers, and that skill set's insane. Like, they can energize and interact with an audience that most just musicians can't do.
Oh, the music is like, it's not even secondhand.
It's like
fourth
part
hand.
play, It's like part drama,
Oh,
and maybe not.
That's all it is. Yeah.
Not trivial part. Like,
No. No.
Yeah.
No, this moved into another area, but somewhat related, maybe.
okay, I think we'll probably wrap it up.
I think we left it. Yeah. Left it in a good spot.
That's fun. All right, so I'm going to be in England for 2 weeks, so when I come back, I'll definitely have a perfect English accent. If anyone doesn't recognize me.